Italy has a long history of creating iconic vehicles. Not only is the country home to legendary manufacturers like Lamborghini and Ferrari, but it's also famous for its stylish, high-performance motorcycles. Brands like Moto Guzzi, Ducati, and MV Agusta have dominated the motorcycle industry with bikes that will forever be remembered. Here are the 10 best classic Italian motorcycles of all time. Number 10, Benelli 750 SEI. In the 1970s, the motorcycle world was obsessed with speed, power, and pushing engineering to its absolute limits. This was the same time the Benelli 750 SEI was released. However, unlike other bikes of the time, the 750 SEI had 6 cylinders, which was way more advanced than the typical 4-cylinder engine of the time. Its 747cc incline 6 was derived from the Honda CB500 4 with some Italian flair added in, and the result was a bike that was super smooth, impressively powerful, and effortlessly cool. The design was pure 70s elegance. It featured triple exhausts on each side, clean lines, and a stance that made it clear this wasn't just another European touring machine. But where the 750 SEI really shined was how it rode. That 6-cylinder layout gave it a buttery, vibration-free ride, while its crisp throttle response made it feel faster than its modest horsepower numbers suggested. Benelli didn't build it to compete with the Japanese giants directly. They built it to show that Italian engineering could dream bigger and bolder. And while the 750 SEI was never a blockbuster in sales, it became a cult icon, proving that sometimes being wildly ambitious is what makes a motorcycle truly legendary. Number 9, Laverda 750 SFC. Some motorcycles are built for the street. The Laverda 750 SFC wasn't one of them. This bike came straight from the racetrack, and even when it was sold to the public, it never really took off its racing gloves. First released in 1971, the 750 SFC was essentially a road-legal endurance racer, hand-assembled by Laverda's small but passionate team. SFC stood for Super Freni Competizione, literally Super Brakes Competition, a nod to the bike's race-spec drum brakes, which were cutting-edge at the time. Its engine was a 744cc parallel twin, but what made the SFC legendary wasn't just its speed, it was its bulletproof durability. Let's just say the bike was designed to hammer through 24-hour endurance races without complaint. The distinctive orange fairing wasn't just for style, although it definitely looked incredible. It was a visual signature that told everyone this was no ordinary street bike. Every SFC felt like it had a bit of factory racing DNA baked into its metal, and owning one meant you were riding a piece of competition history. To this day, motorcycle collectors and lovers cherish the 750 SFC, not just for its rarity, but for being a motorcycle that could win on Sunday and ride to work on Monday, if you were crazy enough to try. Number 8, Moto Marini 3.5. When you think of Italian motorcycles, you probably think of names like Ducati and MV Agusta. The real bike lovers know that Moto Marini deserves a seat at the table, and nothing proves that more than the Moto Marini 3.5, a bike that quietly rewrote the rules for mid-size motorcycles in the 1970s. Launched in 1973, the 3.5 was powered by a 344cc V-twin. This was actually an unusual choice because most bikes in its class usually came with single or parallel twin engines. But that engine was a masterpiece in being small. It was designed by the legendary Franco Lambertini, who had previously worked for Ferrari, and delivered a surprisingly punchy 39 horsepower, but more importantly, it came with a dry clutch and electronic ignition, cutting-edge features at the time, especially for a smaller bike. Now, since the 3.5 is pretty small, it was significantly easier to handle. With its lightweight frame, low center of gravity, and razor-sharp steering, it moved through corners in a way that felt more like an Italian sports car than a motorcycle. It wasn't about raw speed, it was about the riding feel, something that Japanese competitors couldn't quite replicate. For decades, the 3.5 built up a cult following among riders who valued character over spec sheets. Even today, it's one of Italy's best-kept secrets, a reminder that sometimes the most iconic motorcycles come from the smallest workshops. Number 7, MV Agusta 750 Sport. Some motorcycles are born from passion, but the MV Agusta 750 Sport was born from pure dominance. By the time this beauty hit the streets in 1970, MV Agusta had already crushed the competition in Grand Prix racing, racking up more than 35 world titles. The 750 Sport was MV's gift to the streets, a machine that brought championship DNA to everyday riders. Under the sleek, almost aerodynamic bodywork sat a 743cc inline 4, a direct descendant of MV's race-winning GP engines. It pumped out 65 horsepower, impressive for the era, and could crack 120 miles per hour if you were brave enough to twist the throttle all the way. But performance was only half the story. The 750 Sport was a rolling work of art. It featured a sculpted metal framework, shiny chrome, and a race-inspired design that looked like it was moving fast even when it was standing still. From the hand-polished aluminum tank to the signature 4 exhaust pipes, every inch showcased Italian craftsmanship. Despite its exotic appeal, the 750 Sport wasn't just a trophy bike. It had a good amount of stability at high speeds and predictable handling, thanks to a stiff tubular steel frame and a well-tuned suspension. It wasn't as nimble as lighter competitors, but that wasn't the point. The 750 Sport was a grand tourer with a racer's heart, a bike that made you feel like Giacomo Agostini every time you swung a leg over the seat. Today, the MV Agusta 750 Sport stands as one of the most collectible Italian motorcycles ever made. It's a reminder that when Italy decides to blend its racing history with road-going beauty, the result is nothing short of magic. Number 6. Ducati 900 SS. Before Ducati became the red-blooded performance icon we know today, it was a company still figuring out its identity. That all changed in 1972, thanks to a single race and a motorcycle that refused to lose, the Ducati 750 Imola Desmo. That race bike was the father of the Ducati 900 SS, a production version that captured everything Ducati stood for: speed, style, and just enough attitude to keep things spicy. Launched in 1975, the 900 Super Sport wasn't just a follow-up to the Imola winner, it was a statement. It came with an 864cc L-twin with desmodromic valves that could generate around 80 horsepower and could break past 130 miles per hour. That might sound tame today, but in the mid-1970s, that was serious muscle, especially for a bike that still felt like it was wearing its race fairings. But the 900 SS wasn't just about power, it was about the way it delivered it. Ducati's Desmo system meant the valves were mechanically closed instead of relying on springs, allowing faster revving, sharper throttle response, and bulletproof reliability at high RPMs. This was race tech on a road bike, and riders could feel the difference every time they cracked the throttle. Visually, the 900 SS was pure Ducati art. It featured a slim tank, long seat, and minimalist half fairing that gave it the look of a bike permanently in pursuit of the checkered flag. Combined with its race-proven handling and that signature V-twin exhaust sound, the 900 SS became the bike that put Ducati on the global map, proving that Italian motorcycles weren't just beautiful, they were built to dominate. Number 5. Moto Guzzi Le Mans. If Ducati was the artist, then Moto Guzzi was the bruiser, and nothing captured that spirit better than the Moto Guzzi Le Mans, a bike that looked like it was carved from a solid block of Italian steel. Built in 1976, the Le Mans took everything Moto Guzzi had learned from years of building rock-solid touring bikes and injected it with much-needed shot of adrenaline and attitude. At its heart was Guzzi's signature 90-degree V-twin. But this wasn't some sleepy cruiser engine. The 844cc mill was tuned for real performance, cranking out 71 horsepower and sending the Le Mans to a top speed of around 130 miles per hour. Numbers that put it in direct competition with the fastest superbikes of the era. But power was only part of the story. The Le Mans was low, wide, and aggressive, with a cockpit that felt like a fighter jet. Its shaft drive gave it a unique, almost locomotive-like power delivery, and while it wasn't as flickable as smaller rivals, it stuck to the road with confidence thanks to its stable, long-wheelbase chassis. This was a bike built for fast sweepers and high-speed touring, not tight corners, and that was exactly how Guzzi wanted it. But what really made the Le Mans a legend was its attitude. From its angular fairing and bold red paint to its exposed cylinder head sticking out like fists, the Le Mans looked like it was ready for a bar fight. It was raw, mechanical, and unapologetically Italian. A bike that didn't care about being delicate or refined. It cared about going fast and looking damn good doing it. Even today, the Le Mans stands tall as one of Moto Guzzi's greatest achievements. The bike blended performance, character, and unforgettable style into a package that could only come from Italy. Number 4. Galera Saturno. When Galera introduced the Saturno in 1946, Italy was still emerging from the ruins of World War II. Roads were rough, materials were scarce, and motorcycles weren't luxury items. Instead, they were essential machines, built for getting to work, carrying goods, and covering ground quickly. Yet somehow, in the middle of all that grit and necessity, Galera built a bike that could be considered luxurious. The Saturno was essentially a racer tamed for the street. Powered by a single-cylinder, 500cc engine that Galera had spent years perfecting on the track, it wasn't built for brute force or record-breaking top speeds. Instead, it focused on something even rarer in the 1940s: balance. The engine was strong enough to cruise comfortably at highway speeds, yet still light enough to keep the handling sharp and responsive, a combination few bikes could match at the time. Where the Saturno really made its mark was with its chassis design. Using a tubular steel frame and advanced suspension, it could move like a racer, carving through Italy's winding countryside roads with a grace that seemed to define its utilitarian origins. Riders back then didn't just appreciate how fast it was, they fell in love with how natural and intuitive it felt under them. On top of that, the Saturno looked the part, with a sleek, low profile and a signature teardrop fuel tank that gave it an unmistakable silhouette. It wasn't just a motorcycle, it was a symbol of post-war Italian resilience, proving that even in hard times, style and performance could thrive side by side. Let's just say the motorcycle represented Italian genius even when no one expected them to care. Collectors and classic bike lovers today still talk about the Saturno, but not because it's just another pretty machine from Italy's golden era. They talk about it because it captured the soul of a country rebuilding itself, with two wheels and a roaring single-cylinder heart. Number 3, MV Agusta 500cc Triple. When the conversation turns to racing royalty, the MV Agusta 500 Triple doesn't just enter the chat, it takes the throne. This wasn't a street bike adapted for the racetrack, this was a purebred Grand Prix machine, built with one goal, winning everything in sight. And for most of the 1960s, that's exactly what it did. The story of the 500cc Triple starts with Count Domenico Agusta, a man who didn't just love motorcycles, he was also obsessed with winning. By the early 1960s, MV Agusta's race bikes were dominating the smaller classes, but the premier 500cc category still belonged to Norton and Galera. That wasn't good enough for the Count, so his engineers developed a machine that would change racing history. The 500cc Triple was an engineering marvel, featuring a 3-cylinder machine with double overhead cams. This engine was ahead of its time, and it made the bike very loud with an exhaust note that sounded like thunder echoing through the Alps. The bike made around 78 horsepower, which might not sound like much today, but combined with its lightweight chassis, it became unstoppable. From 1966 to 1972, it carried Giacomo Agostini to 7 consecutive 500cc World Championships, a streak so dominant it practically rewrote the rule book. And while the 500 Triple was never meant for public roads, it inspired MV's road-going sport bikes for decades to come. Every time an MV Agusta rider twists the throttle today, they're hearing a faint echo of that legendary 3-cylinder scream. A reminder that before the brand became famous for exotic street bikes, it was a racing juggernaut that ruled the world's fastest tracks. The MV Agusta 500 Triple isn't just a classic Italian motorcycle, it's a monument to what happens when passion, technology, and a relentless hunger for victory come together in perfect harmony. Number 2, Ducati 916. When the Ducati 916 first appeared in 1994, it didn't stun the world with its beauty, it made everyone love Italian motorcycles even more. From the moment it rolled onto the world stage, the motorcycle world shifted. This wasn't just a new superbike, it was a design revolution. A machine so beautiful, so technically advanced, and so brutally fast, it rewrote the entire playbook for what a superbike could be. The 916 was the work of Massimo Tamburini, a super famous Italian motorcycle designer. Tamburini designed motorcycles like no one else around the world, and the 916 was his masterpiece. The bike came with aggressive twin headlights, a razor-sharp tail section, an underseat exhaust, and a perfectly proportioned silhouette that looked so good it changed how Italian designers made motorcycles in the 90s. Not just that, it even caused brands across Europe and Japan to struggle to catch up, but none could match the sheer presence of the 916. Underneath the sculpted bodywork sat a 916cc L-twin engine, pumping out 114 horsepower, which might seem modest today until you remember how light and razor-sharp the chassis was. The 916 was engineered for precision. Every input, throttle, brake, lean, felt telepathic, the kind of connection only the best Italian machinery could deliver. The 916 wasn't just a pretty face either. It dominated world superbike racing, taking titles in 1994, 1995, and 1996, with legendary rider Carl Fogarty at the controls. It wasn't just winning races, it was winning hearts, proving that a motorcycle could be both a track weapon and a design icon at the same time. Today, the 916 is a cultural artifact. A machine that sits alongside the E-Type Jaguar or the Ferrari F40 is one of those rare designs that transcends its purpose and becomes pure art. It wasn't just a Ducati, it was the Ducati. Number 1, Moto Guzzi V8. If the Ducati 916 was a design revolution, the Moto Guzzi V8, properly known in Italy as the Otto Cilindri, was pure madness. In the 1950s, Moto Guzzi's racing department did something no one expected, something so technically ambitious that even today, it feels like science fiction. They built a 500cc racing motorcycle with an 8-cylinder engine. Yeah, you heard that right. 8 cylinders in a motorcycle in 1955. The story begins with Julio Cesar Carcano, the engineering wizard behind Moto Guzzi's racing success. At the time, most competitors were relying on singles and twins, keeping things simple and reliable. But Carcano had a wild idea. If you could split the displacement across more cylinders, you could build a higher revving engine with smoother power delivery and less stress on each piston. The result was a 490cc V8 with tiny pistons, twin camshafts, and a tangle of intake and exhaust pipes that looked like it belonged on a Formula One car, not a motorcycle. The numbers were staggering for the 1950s. The Otto Cilindri made over 78 horsepower, almost unheard of at the time, and could reach a top speed of over 170 miles per hour, decades ahead of its time. Riders said the power band was explosive, and the sound was unlike anything ever heard on a racetrack. But the V8's genius was also its downfall. It was fiendishly complex to build and maintain, requiring delicate precision at a time when racing mechanics were more used to spanners and brute force. The frame and suspension struggled to keep up with the engine's performance, and the bike developed a reputation for being frightening at the limit. By 1957, Moto Guzzi withdrew from Grand Prix racing, and the V8 project was shelved. Only a handful were ever built, and it quickly became the stuff of legend. A machine so ambitious, so daring, was almost too far ahead of its time. Yet the Otto Cilindri's legacy lives on, not just in Moto Guzzi's history books, but in the very idea that motorcycles could and should push the boundaries of engineering imagination. It was Italian creativity at its wildest, a machine that proves sometimes the most important motorcycles aren't the ones that win the most races, they're the ones that change what we believe is possible. Now, which bike do you think is the single greatest Italian motorcycle ever built, and why? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more amazing videos of your favorite motorcycles.